Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
An American singer, songwriter, arranger, keyboardist, and music producer. I started to read your bio and your discography and the people that you've worked with. If I just read that list alone, we'd be here all day. But let me run down a few of your credits. Producer for such artists as Michael Bolton, The Imperials, Dolly Parton, Clint Black, Peter Cetera, Amy Grant, Whitney Houston, The Jacksons, Cliff Richard, Donna Summer, Rod Stewart, and Trisha Yearwood. You are a multiple Grammy Award winner for Producer of the Year and Keyboardist of the Year. In 1980, you were nominated for 10 Grammy Awards, winning 3, including Producer of the Year for the Christopher Cross debut album.
Yes, sir.
Also nominated for Heart in Motion by Amy Grant, winner of 3 Dove Awards. A founding member of the disco funk group Rhythm Heritage, which if you're a fan of TV, especially back in the days in the 70s, the show SWAT, you guys did the theme song for that. Mm-hmm. And then Keep Your Eye on the Sparrow, which was the Robert Blake Show Beretta. Yeah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Michael Omartian is in the studio.
I appreciate that.
How'd you get started?
Well, my parents, I lived in Chicago, and as a kid, I wasn't aware there were any other musicians in the family, but my mom would tell me that I'd walk around the house, pick up a couple of sticks or something, and I'd start just playing drums to anything that I heard. She surmised that there was something there. I came from a neighborhood in Chicago where a lot of our relatives were close by, so my aunt had a piano. So between the smacking around with sticks, I'd go over to my aunt's house, and at 4 years old, I would hear something, and she said I would sit at the piano, and within a couple minutes, I'd be actually playing the melody of whatever that was that I was hearing. And she said to my mom, Sophie was her name, Sophie, your son seems to have some ability. I think it would be good if you got him started on some lessons. So at 4 years old, I started getting instructions. I played accordion, played piano, played drums. And so that's how I got started, very young. And like I said, now we're talking about the 50s, like the late 40s, early 50s. I was born in 1945. So music, as it would be back then, it was kind of an alien thing for a family to think that someone in their family would actually end up doing that, because it seems so out there somewhere. There was no awareness of a recording industry. There was no awareness of anything except for my son's going to end up playing at clubs and he's going to be a drunk and a drug addict. That was kind of the very essence of, if we pursue this to a certain point, what if he ends up doing that? Which none of it was ever really came true. But
you came from a really tight-knit family.
Yeah, I'm Armenian. Like a lot of ethnic families in big cities like Chicago and New York and different places, you would find that a lot of your families would live within, a mile, and you'd be walking to each other's house and stuff like that. So it was tight. It was a tight family, absolutely.
You went from drums to, as you said, accordion and piano. Was it sacrificing one for the other, or did you just find more interest as being a piano player?
I think that it's so hard to put a form or any kind of any kind of shape to it, because it came from an era where, unlike today, where you can point to so many things and you can go, well, my analytics tell me that if you do this, then you should be good at that. There was no such thing. It was just ad hoc. You kind of did something. And, back then we had little record players. 78 RPM was a single. It was almost the size of an album. But my very first purchase was Cab Calloway's Minnie the Moocher. And I would play that over and over and over again. So I don't know how one related to the other. It just seemed to all kind of meld together. I think if it was today, you could put a lot more of a timeline or something on it. It was a little bit more arbitrary then. I was kind of a one-off. So I don't know how to answer that properly.
Were you more of a improvising, I should say, more than structure from reading music? I mean, was it just easier for you?
Yeah, I had a classical piano instructor that would regularly hit my knuckles with a ruler because as I was doing my lesson, I would take off and she would smack me and say, "We don't improvise." And I thought to myself, we don't improvise because you can't improvise. I didn't say that. I would never say that. But that was kind of what I came up with, is that she didn't like the fact that I was able to go outside of the box. But then it became very evident to me that the joy that I would get was not so much reading someone else's notes from 3 centuries ago, but I would enjoy just kind of pulling stuff out of the air, listening to Oscar Peterson or Art Tatum and go, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So that was kind of what pulled me out of the classical side of things. But I have to tell you, I'm probably one of the number one fans of classical music. I love it. I'm so blown away with, Tchaikovsky and Bach and Beethoven, those guys, and Mozart. And a lot of the female composers that have come out of that whole thing today, the contemporary composers that are amazing, that are kind of paying homage to that. I mean, it's amazing. I think it's an unbelievable form. When you think about people who they were commissioned to do something and they didn't write a 3-minute song at a writing session with a couple, let's get together at 2:00 and write a song. Right. These people were committed for a year or two to one piece of music. And so I just think, wow, that's just, it's incredible.
You moved to Los Angeles to get into the business. What did you start out doing there?
Anything I could.
Yeah.
And I didn't charge anybody anything. I just really starved for 4 years. I didn't know where to go. There was one person I knew. His name is Bill Schnee, who was kind of a famous engineer, producer. I mean, he's kind of the engineer's engineer. And I befriended him when I got there, and he was over at CBS as a staff engineer. And so he was my buddy, but I mean, the thing was, it was the early days. You had the Wrecking Crew, which was the Hal Blaines and those Joe Osbornes and those musicians. And I went to LA thinking I was a songwriter. What I didn't realize was going to happen, I was going to become a session keyboard player. So, who knows? I mean, you just throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. But when I got there, I ended up doing music for church. I ended up doing music for anybody. I would get calls. I said, hey, I'll play on anything. You don't have to pay me. Well, anyway, Kenny Loggins and Jim Messina of Poco were putting together a band called Loggins and Messina. And I had met Kenny through Clark Burroughs, who used to be part of the High-Lows. Now, we're going way back.
Yeah.
The High-Low singing group. And Clark's wife, Marilyn, was doing a performance thing, and Kenny was her guitar player. So I got a call from Kenny out of nowhere, and of course, Kenny Loggins was just Kenny Loggins, just like anybody. Waddy Wachtel was in that band.
I remember Waddy, yeah.
So we ended up doing this thing with Marilyn, and out of that, Kenny said, Omar, they used to call me Omar, we're going to put a band together with Jimmy Messina, my friend, and it's going to be Loggins and Messina. And so that was the very first, what I would say is that something that had form and substance to it was to be part of that band. But we rehearsed that first album sitting in for like 9 months. And being an improviser, working on the same 10 songs for 9 months, I'm going crazy. But in the interim, what happened was a friend of mine in L.A. who I had co-written a song with, he had a recording deal, his name is Jerry McLean, with Bob Alcivar, who was the arranger for The Fifth Dimension. And one of the songs they're going to do on their 3-song session was going to be a thing that I co-wrote with this guy, Jerry. And Jerry said, I want this guy to play piano on this session. And Bob said, I don't know who this guy is. I've got Hal Blaine, I got Joe Osborne, I got Larry Carlton, I got these guys. I'm not going to take a chance on a new keyboard player. And Jerry, I couldn't believe it. He said, if you don't have this guy on that session, he said, we don't have a record deal. And so that's a guy going to the mat on your behalf. So anyway, I puked the whole night before, knowing who I was going to be in the studio with. And sure enough, I'm there and I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking, and I play. And the minute the first take is done, Hal looks at me and says, I want your phone number.
Wow.
And I went, I was horrible. I mean, I thought I stunk. But your own perception through your nervousness, you don't know what you did. And then Joe Osborne and Hal took me on the break right straight to Local 47 and signed me up with the union, got me hooked up with an answering service, and the very next week, I was booked solid. Now I had a bit of a crisis on my hands. I'm part of a group called Loggins in Messina, and now I'm all of a sudden playing on a Barbra Streisand record, on a Neil Diamond record, on a this person record, on a that person record, and I'm going, this suits my improvisational thing really well. This over here is road work, playing the same songs over and over. I don't care if they're hits. There were a couple of hits off that Your Mama Don't Dance,
right?
Winnie the Pooh, House on Pooh Corner, excuse me. There were a couple of hits that were there, so you knew that was going to launch right away, and which would mean I'd be out on the road. And I remember how heartbreaking it was for me, and also how, I guess, distressing it was for them when I said, guys, I'm sorry to do this because I've been with you for a solid year doing this, but I'm going to become a session player. And what was beautiful is they called me back for the next 2 records, so evidently it wasn't that much of a crisis. Anyway, so that's how I got started, and that was about 1972, I want to say. 1972, somewhere in there, was the Loggins Messina thing, and that was also the birth of the session playing thing. And like I said, I went to L.A. thinking I was going to be a songwriter. But those early days of improvising and then understanding what you do with chord structure. And I also had, I guess what helped me become a producer was the fact that I always thought in terms of, if we're doing a pop record, why would you do something different? The second chorus of a tune, if you've got a hook going in the first chorus, why wouldn't you do that in the second chorus? And so I was thinking like a pop song person, where you've got hooks. And there was a gentleman named Steve Berry, who was a huge, major influence on me. He
worked with Tommy Rowe and the Herman Hermits and the Grassroots.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, and the thing about him is, it was kind of bubblegum or whatever it was, but Steve taught me what it is to listen to a song and know whether you've really got something here, or if you're just enjoying something that might be just for you and it's not going to go very far. And Steve was at a company called ABC Dunhill. They had Three Dog Night, Jim Croce, Steppenwolf, Mamas and the Papas. It goes on and on and on. Everything they put their hands to was successful. And a lot of that had to do with this A&R guy named Steve Berry, who could hear a hit record coming in, and Jay Lasker, who was this big burly guy that smoked long cigars, and he would scare the crud out of you when he talked to you because you thought, this guy is the head of this company that's just successful, and I'm just a little peon in this company. So Steve got me to be an A&R man at ABC Dunhill, and it was one of my first experiences doing that.
And you had no experience up to that, right?
But that was the whole record business.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about any educational programs. There were no colleges you went to. If you decided to be something, there was only one way to do it. Get in there and do it. Today, you can get a degree in whatever you want. That doesn't guarantee anything. My engineer of 35 years, Terry Christian, started by getting coffee for people at Sunset Sound. And then he became an engineer for Prince and all the stuff that we've done and everything like that. That's how you did it. And in a way, I think it's way preferable than this illusion that I can go to a university and get a degree in whatever it is. And somehow there's this perception that I'm guaranteed something when it can be a little misleading. I think you get a faster gauge by going right into it.
Get into the trenches.
Get into the trenches, and you'll know much quicker whether you've got what you need or what it takes to do this, and you haven't spent $300,000 on an education. So that's just my perspective.
In the studio with us today, here in Nashville, Tennessee, Michael Omartian.
Hey, this is April Ryder, and you are listening to The Business Side of Music with the fantastic Bob Bender.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Tom Sabella, the creator, founder, and co-producer of the Business Side of Music podcast. It's loyal listeners such as yourself that make our podcast successful. Take the time to sign up for our weekly newsletter. Not only does it contain information on upcoming podcast episodes, but also informative tidbits on the music industry and even bonus items that we give away. All you have to do is sign up at businesssideofmusic.com, and we will send you Larry Butler's new singer-songwriter rulebook. That's it. All you have to do is go to businesssideofmusic.com, sign up, and we will send you Larry Butler's new book. Thanks to all our loyal listeners. We love you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook. 101 ways to help you improve your chances of success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena. And believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message. Thanks.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
So you were an A&R guy at ABC Dunhill. You also were a producer. You were an artist for a while, too.
Actually, Steve Berry, the same guy we talked about in the last segment, said, why don't you do an album? I said, I never even thought about something like this. I said, okay. We had 24-track tape to work with, which was great because it really limits what you can do. You have to make decisions. So Stormy, my wife, wrote the lyrics to an album that in certain circles became kind of like had a bit of a cult following called White Horse. And my studio musician pals were on it, all the cats that I worked with. And we did this album, even though it didn't really sell that well. It was just kind of fun to actually do a project like that. But I knew from doing that I wasn't a front man. I don't want to go out and tour. I'm much happier being a facilitator or a help to someone else who has the drive. There's a certain thing that I think an artist has to have. I didn't have it, and I knew it. I knew that I could do music, but I was much better as a support to someone else.
But you loved being in the studio.
Studio rat, yeah.
Other acts that you worked with as a session player, we're going to talk about Steely Dan in a moment because obviously that's a seminal album that you were on. But the Four Tops, Johnny Rivers, Seals and Crofts, and of course you mentioned Loggins and Messina, Al Jarreau. How did that just come about? Did just one gig lead to another gig in the studio?
It was a community of, I would say, maybe 15 guitar players, maybe 6 or 7 keyboard players, maybe same amount of bass players, and maybe 10 drummers. And once you penetrated that particular group, it was always when someone would call, there were answering services back then, and someone would say, we're doing a record on Friday, da-da-da-da-da. I want so-and-so, and so, well, so-and-so isn't available. Who is? Boom, I want that person. So it was like, once you got into that thing, you were always busy. Always busy. And it was I really appreciated the blessing of that because I saw other people that weren't able to penetrate that had plenty of talent. But it took another side to be successful, and that is the ability to get along with others. Absolutely one of the most important things. And if you happen to be very strong-willed and very opinionated, the idea of you being able to meld and have a successful career at this was diminished because it was like a football team. Everybody cooperated. Everybody had their job, their position. And if you started overstepping that by trying to tell other people how they're supposed to do what they're doing, unless you were given permission to do so, which would happen when I became an arranger and a producer. But as a studio player, and I remember introducing a guy out of New Orleans, he was so talented, but he burned out within a couple of weeks because people said, we can't work with this guy because he's just so strong-willed and big-headed. And I just was so sad because the guy had the chops. I'm not going to mention his name, but it was only a few weeks and he was gone.
Yeah. When you go into the studio on sessions like that and you talk about improvisation, were you given some latitude, some leeway on what you could do in the studio? Did you have charts that you worked off of, or did you write your own charts? Or
everything was different. It depended on who you worked with. If you were doing a Streisand record, there were very sophisticated charts that Al Capps or the other arrangers, someone would bring in. As far as a rhythm section, the notes weren't written out unless it was an important chord, important inversion of a chord, or an important rhythm vibe that you wanted. That was written out, but you would never see it.
It was mostly just blocks of.
It was blocks of chords, accidental marks, and whatever. That's how you went by it. Yeah, that's how it went.
When you got to the point of being that A&R guy, you eventually moved on over to Warner Brothers. Were you doing the same thing there?
Yeah. Steve Barry, the guy that was my mentor at ABC, was offered a post at Warner Brothers. Lenny Waronker was, and Mo Austin was the president, and Lenny Waronker was the head of A&R. And Steve said, I go, but I'm taking someone with me. Actually, it was like a package deal. I found out later that that's what he said. So I've had people that have really gone to the mat on my behalf, and he said, I'm going, I'll come here. He said, but you got to offer this guy. And they did. And so I was part of a 12-person A&R department that included people like Teddy Templeman, you know, the Doobie Brothers, Van Halen, Russ Titleman, Eric Clapton, Stevie Winwood, Gary Katz, Steely Dan, Steve Barry, all these things. And I was in this A&R department, and you're looking around and going, and it was a riot. I mean, it was just like a riot. Our Wednesday morning meetings they should have been filmed. They would have made a great, crazy TV show because it was hysterical, some of the stuff that was brought to us.
Let's talk for a few minutes regarding the Steely Dan project. You were on Asia.
I was on Asia, Pretzel Logic, and Katy Lied.
When I did some research on Asia, I found out that there were over 36 session players on that project. I think you've been quoted as saying that Becker and Fagen weren't really good at giving out praise. When they said it was a take, that's when you knew it was good enough for them.
None of us were ever invited to lunch or a dinner, which was odd. I'm not trying to make them into bad guys. I just think they were so devoted to what they were doing, and they were so serious about it that it wasn't, I don't know, it was fun in some regard. But if you wanted affirmation, that wasn't the session to be in because you just never knew where you stood. And I had kind of a running joke with Fagen, go back and forth with him, and he would kind of smile at me because I would kind of poke fun at this kind of vibe that was going on. And he thought that was funny. But with Katy Lied and Pretzel Logic, I would go to Donald's apartment and we would map out charts. He was driving the ship. I was there to transcribe, add maybe an inversion or add another chord, but it was their trip. But I got to see kind of how they thought. They had books piled up everywhere. They were big readers, and a lot of their lyrics would come from these books that they would read. And I would spend, drinking coffee and just sitting there at a keyboard and taking down chords and stuff like that. And I'd get it to a copyist and we would do our sessions. The unique thing about Steely Dan is I remember one song I was the only constant in 8 distinctive rhythm sections for one song. I was the only one. And I said at the end, I said, since we're not getting this, could it be that I shouldn't be on
the common denominator here? Yeah.
I said, maybe you're not getting it because of me. And I thought that would maybe get a laugh, but I mean, I don't know, with them, you hardly ever did. But it was 36 people on Asia. Does not surprise me because I cut probably 3 or 4 songs for Asia and one got on the album.
Which was Asia, right?
Yeah.
When you hear that piano part in the beginning, which is you, was that something that you improvised or was that something that you and Donald just worked out?
No, I mean, there was that basic, a little thing that I did. They would do a chord, then go to the next chord, and the musicians would fill in. And a lot of the overdubs, I think Donald is a phenomenal keyboard player. There's no doubt about it. But I think he was more comfortable not being on the track and just adding on overdubs.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that if he wasn't one who wanted to hear the whole thing and not just concentrate on what he was doing, he would have played on the tracks.
Because when you listen to that album, and I'm one of those audiophiles, that's what you play when you want to test out the acoustics in a room or test out your speakers. You crank that up and then, of course, you had guys like Steve Gadd on drums and Wayne Shorter played sax. I mean, the talent was amazing on that project.
They were brilliant. I mean, it's funny. I did a thing here at MTSU, and then we got on this subject of Steely Dan. I was in a panel or something like that, and some kid raises his hand. I have a question for Mr. Omartian. I said, yeah. He says, I don't like Steely Dan. And I said, so what's the question? And he goes, I don't like Steely Dan. I said, okay.
Next.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty funny.
In the studio with us today, Michael Omartian.
This is Royce Taylor, and I want you to listen to the Business Side of Music podcast with Bob Bender, and don't let me down.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Hey, it's Chris SD from Sync Songwriter. Imagine what it would be like getting your music into the latest TV shows, movies, or ads. Your songs would not only get exposure in front of millions of viewers, you'd get paid to do it. and gain a reputation as the songwriter that you are. I've been showing songwriters, composers, and artists how to get their music into TV and film for over 15 years. Collectively, they have generated hundreds of thousands of dollars from licensing their music. Their music has been on networks such as HBO, Bravo, ABC, NBC, Netflix, and more. In films or trailers such as Predator, Annihilation, Christmas Chronicles, Professor Mac, and many others. So many songwriters upload their music to websites hoping to get discovered. Unfortunately, this almost never happens with the millions of songs out there competing for attention. I show you how to get your music heard by the people who can actually make it happen for you. When you start getting your music licensed, you automatically develop a reputation in the industry. This lets you get syncs over and over again. If you'd like to discover how to connect with the right people in music licensing, just click the Sync Songwriter logo on the Business Side of Music webpage, and I'll see you there.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Vince Gill, you wrote a top 5 hit with him called When Love Finds You. How was it to work with someone like Vince?
One of the nicest guys I've ever been around, and one of the most talented people that I've ever been around. I mean, I'll go to breakfast with him at a place called Nashville here. I'll just call him up. He said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Let's go to breakfast and we'll go hang out and eat." He's just the nicest guy. And when it came to that, he had actually finished the record that became When Love Finds You. That album was finished. And I remember he was playing golf. He lived off a road. He's a golf enthusiast. I mean, he's into it. So he lived on a golf course. And I remember I went and played golf with him one day, and then I went home and I started this thing in 3/4 time, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And I remember I just picked up the phone. I said, "Vince," I said, "I got this thing." I said, "I want you to hear this." And I started playing the da-da-da-dum-dum, and I started humming the thing. He said, "Would you please make a cassette and bring it over?" I took the cassette to him of me humming on this thing. And 4 hours later, it was dinner time. I remember it was dinner time. I get a call from him. He says, "What do you think of this lyric?" And he sang the whole thing down. And I said, "Wow." He said, "What do you think if we cut this week?" And so Tony Brown called me. He said, "Let's get in the studio." And it was the title track of the album. So things happen kind of wild in this business. And an inspiration becomes whatever it was, and we were up for a CMA award for it, for Song of the Year.
It was a top 5 hit for Vince.
I think it was a #1 country hit. So, it was incredible. And I had never written what I would consider a country song. And every musician on that date was strictly country players. And it was so much fun. I mean, it was really fun.
We Are the World.
Yeah.
You were the arranger and keyboardist. How did that all come about?
I go through this. In fact, I just did a thing a couple days ago where I have to kind of dial everything back. People say you were the arranger and the keyboardist. I was one of many keyboardists,
right?
And I was one of many arrangers. The arrangement kind of became an organic thing that happened out of Omar doing intro. So I went in with Quincy and I laid out this entire intro. And then he called in Phil and Gaines. Phil and Gaines do this. And
how much time did everybody have to put this together? Because this was done, after the Grammys one night, they brought everybody in?
Yeah, well, that was for the vocals.
Okay.
The track was done over a few days, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, I did the whole intro that leads into it was all my synthesizers and stuff like that. So I have to be careful because people say you co-produced it. No, I did not co-produce it. I was one of hundreds that were involved with that record.
What were you thinking when you realized how big this was going to be?
Oh, it was crazy. Yeah. It was unbelievable. And nobody could pull this off but Mr. Jones.
Yeah, Quincy Jones, yeah.
Dude, he could call anybody and they'd all show up. It was a big deal.
And they did.
Yeah, they all showed up, man. I don't know if this is true, but I think that the money is still hung up in somewhere.
Oh, geez.
Because of the politics of that country, so anyway.
Well, let's go on a little better subject.
Yeah.
Christopher Cross Sailing, that you won the Grammys on. That album, I remember when the track Sailing came out, I was like, oh my gosh, whoever wrote this and produced this, what a body of work. Wow. How did that come about?
I was in the Warner Brothers A&R department, and I was new to it, but Christopher Cross wasn't new to them because every Wednesday they used to have a A&R meeting, and every once in a while a tape would come in of the new Christopher Cross song. And this is the first time I heard this. When Lenny said, "Hey, we got a new Christopher Cross tune," and I don't know, it didn't mean anything to me. And so he puts it in, and I can't remember exactly what it might have been Ride Like the Wind. I'm not sure. And it was a demo with his band. Kind of, it was good. But the song, I went, all right. I said, is there anything else? He said, oh, yeah. So he puts in Sailing, and he put in a couple other things, and I went, well, what does everybody think? And they said, I said, I love this. And Lenny says, you love it? You can do it. Go ahead and do it.
Wow.
Listen, the thing about that time, which I think produced that whole era, the 60s, 70s, 80s, that produced incredible music was because you didn't go to a focus group. You didn't get the opinions or polling over whether something would be a hit. We know people are fickle. What I like this moment might not be what I like the next moment. And you're basing big decisions off of this kind of crazy opinion. Back then, oh, you like it? Go do it. And then bring it to us at the end, and we'll tell you whether we can do something with it or not. And that was the way it worked.
How much did you and Christopher work on the arrangements of these songs together?
Well, there was quite a bit. I mean, the thing is, the funny story of this is that Chris had always envisioned himself working with either Laney Warnaker or Russ Titleman, not whoever this guy is that's interested in me. So he comes to Warner's. I didn't realize this was going on. I thought, okay, I got the gig. He comes in, he sits down in my office. Man, I love that. Oh, good. I'm going, the vibe is so strange. I'm going, well, what's going on here, man? And so it was like an hour. So, okay, I'll let you know. I'll let you know. So he walks out. And I remember going, what just happened? This is the weirdest thing in the world. I thought that he knew that I was going to be. Anyway, I go to lunch and I come back and he barges into he says, you're my producer. I said, well, I thought maybe, he says, as soon as I found out you played on Steely Dan, that's all I needed. And that was it. So we started right then. So it was about 1979, maybe end of 78, 79. We started working on the Christopher Cross record. So the thing was, I was used to working with studio musicians on a lot of stuff. He had a band. And I worked on band records, but I worked on band records as being brought in as a keyboard player to be put a part on some existing musician's band. We're working with a band, his band. And they were good, but they weren't studio players. But that's what made it so good. Because they were playing, I don't mean this demeaning, but when people play kind of at their limit, you get some really good stuff. If a jazz drummer comes in to do a rock thing, yeah, he can play jazz, but if he's just strictly a rock player, you're going to get the best of what you want at that time. And so we worked on Ride Like the Wind for 3 days. And the reason why it wasn't coming together is we needed something to make it hang together. Da-da, da-da. It was working. Da-da. I don't know who came up with it. I don't know if it was me or somebody. I said, let's just try 4 on the floor for what the heck? It's disco time. Go ahead and hit. And Tommy Taylor, great drummer. I could see him looking at me like, oh, are we doing a disco? What are we doing? And as soon as it went, boom, 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 it just changed. Everybody went, whoa, what just happened? And then we got it right away. It was just one element that you go, something isn't feeling right. And it was that 1, 2, 3, 4, banging on that bass drum. And I think we even added an artificial thing just to make it even more penetrating. So, and then Sailing. The funny thing about Sailing, and I joke about it, when I got the demo, when it came to that instrumental, it was just some synthesizer weirdness. It was nothing. And I remember we finished the track. I said, Chris, I've got an idea for that instrumental. He says, okay. I said, just turn on the piano. Da-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. I just want to play. It was one take. I just write. That was it. And I walked in, and the guy and the band goes, that's it. That's what that's. And Chris goes, I'm not sure. Because he was so used to hearing this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It was just kind of like a pad of some kind. Nothing really doing much. We sat there, and the guys are going, and his engineer, Chet, Chris, we got it. It's the right thing. It has a hook to it, like. I'm not blowing my own horn, but
it was such a subtle piano part there.
It was just a piano part that took over as a solo, and Chris wasn't comfortable with it. So about 2 hours later, the guy that comes into the studio to empty the trash bags and stuff like that comes walking in, and Chris says, hey, come here for a second. He says, I want you to listen to something.
Let's bring the big guns in.
I am not kidding. And this is exactly the opinion you want. Are you kidding me? So anyway, he said, I want you to listen to something and see if you like it. So he plays maybe the second chorus. He says, what do you think of the piano? He says, I love it. He says, okay, that's all I need to hear. And that was it. So we called that transient response was our thing, which is kind of an engineering term. The transient comes in and it's his response, But that was the funny story of that one. Like anything, And I learned this as a producer. When you're working with an artist for the first time, they've been working on songs for 10 years. And they've weeded out all the junk, and you're left with the stuff that you go, man, we got an album here. Well, it takes off. Now you're on the road. Now it's time for album 2. So you're being asked to do what took you 10 years of great songwriting to reproduce it for your second album. And he's not alone. I mean, this is the conundrum of everything that happens like that. And so the second album, which really didn't have nearly the success, was bolstered when we were asked to do the Arthur's theme for the movie Arthur.
Right.
That wasn't part of that album at all. It just wasn't. It was done. It was like I was relaying about the other story I was telling you about, where a song comes after and then becomes the glue. Well, when Burt Bacharach, Carol Bayer Sager, and Christopher Cross, and one other person who's I should know, they wrote this song. And we saw the movie, we cracked up. It was really funny. I mean, we were laughing so hard. And so we did the theme, and that became the impetus for album number 2. And even though there were great songs, I would say good songs on the second album, it didn't have quite the brilliance of the songwriting of the first album, because you just can't come up with stuff just like that.
Yeah,
Give me
overnight.
something brilliant. Boom, boom. You know, maybe some people can do it. I don't know. Most people can't.
Let's move on to Thelma Houston and Pressure Cooker. That was quite the project. It was different than the norm because it was direct to disc. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, for those who might not understand what direct-to-disc is that you really are bypassing all the means of recording, whether it be a 24-track or 48-track machine, whatever it is, and you're going straight to the lathe that cuts the disc that becomes the master to go to be printed. So you're bypassing all the noise and everything from tape that would normally be part of this to just the pure cutting of a record.
Was this an experiment, or was this a direction they just wanted to
Well,
go?
Doug Sachs, who owned a place called Producer's Workshop, and Lincoln Mayorga, who's a phenomenal piano player, they kind of put this thing together as an idea. They were going to do jazz albums, call it a direct-to-disc thing, real hi-fi, use virgin vinyl, all the things that you would use to make it sound really good. So this was a very ambitious project because it was a pop record. It wasn't like going in with a 3-piece jazz group and doing a side, because you couldn't stop. The idea is you cannot stop. You've got to do the entire side of a record.
So it's song after song after song after song.
Yeah. The only difference being that where you would normally have maybe a 3-second or 4-second space between tracks, just because of what it took to reset up things, people running from one instrument to another, you had about 10 seconds. And that would be the only difference, was that there was a delay between tracks, but it's real time. And so we had 4 keyboard players. We had 2 drummers, we had 2 bass players, we had 2 or 3 guitar players, we had a horn section, we had a lead singers, we had background singers. Everybody in the room at the same time doing one entire side of an album and then another entire side of an album. So Thelma Houston was the lead singer for most of the songs. And I arranged 3 or 4 of the tracks. And when I arranged, as the arranger, I would get off the keyboard and I would stand up and kind of conduct and make sure everything was set up. And then I would run to whatever instrument I was on next, B3, whatever piano. And then the next person would run up to the podium. And you could see Jim Keltner was one drummer, Jim Gordon was another drummer, and they had to split it because they had 2 different drum sounds. So it was a challenge. We actually got it done. We had a full session rehearsal, which is a full day rehearsal, which is like 6 hours. Came in the next morning and did that side. And then we had a full day of rehearsal for side 2, and then came in the next morning. So it took about 4 days to do it. And then Bill Schneid, the guy that I had talked to earlier, was the lead engineer. But when you looked in the booth, I'm telling you, there were so many bodies in there. And my job is to make sure the input fader is here, the EQ is here and stuff. Every person had a job, and you had 10 seconds in which to perform it. Everybody. That's all you had. And I remember we're in side 1 or side 2, I forgot what it was. And Jim Keltner was the drummer, and somehow the music that was supposed to be in front of his stand, he had somehow filed it where he couldn't find it.
Oh.
And most players, because you're doing so much, he wasn't really sure of what we were doing. I've got 10 seconds up on that podium, actually about 5 seconds, because it takes me a little time to get up there. I said, we're doing this song, Jim, and you can see him going like this. I'm going, Jim, you got to find it. And it's a ballad. So I go like this, and he hits a cymbal as hard because he doesn't know what we're doing. And so the side we had to scrap the side and start over again. But I mean, you talk about stuff that just got your blood pressure up and all the kind of challenges. I mean, today you can make mistake after mistake and just correct it. You can tune vocals. Where's the hair on the back of your neck going, oh my God, I hope I do this right. I hope I don't screw up. There's none of that.
Yeah. The organic of it all.
Yeah, there was something about being a little nervous about doing something, hoping you don't screw up. It was that was a cool project. And from what I understand, because they could only produce so many, I think each master, I forgot how many, it was a few hundred, 1,000, and they were able to do like a small run. So I hear that a in-wrapper album is worth quite a bit of money right now.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a bit.
What are you up to these days?
COVID.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Aren't we all?
Well, I'm in the middle of 2 projects that have kind of stalled because of this. One of the projects is a group called 5 to 1, 5 singers. One's from Scotland, one is in Louisiana, one is in South Carolina, and one is in Knoxville, Tennessee, and one is here. So I can't get them together. We started the project just before, we started in February of 2020, and of course March hit, so I can't do anything there. And there was another album that I'm trying to do, but it's going to involve so many people that right now I don't think everybody feels comfortable enough yet to be in a room. In fact, I had heard in the last couple months that one of the top vocal background groups that you want to hire in Nashville, everybody got COVID off of a session. So we have to be careful. And also I'm 75 next week. And so to me, I look back at what has happened in the past and I go, I'm totally satisfied.
Right.
I'm totally blessed. Thank you, God. You've blessed me beyond blessing. If it ends, I'm totally fine. And I'd rather see it passed off to someone who is in their wheelhouse. And even though I can still do it, I've got a little pain in my knuckles. It's all the normal things that happen when you get a little older. And I don't do what most people should do if you want to stay active, is to listen to a lot what's going on right now. Because frankly, it doesn't push the buttons for me.
Right.
And I'm not sure whether what pushes my buttons would interest a lot of people, young people today. I'm not sure. So I'm okay.
Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.